Today's question comes from Matt Do Talks. He says, "Hey Brandon, I'm the biggest guy in my gym and have no one else in my weight class to train with. Not really sure if the techniques I do work because I did it well or because the size difference. How do you train to make sure that a technique works on a guy your size?" Well, this one is probably the most relatable question I've ever gotten. I mean, there's some pretty good questions, but living in Montreal, I tend to be one of the bigger guys, whereas like back home in Louisville, there was a lot of big guys. I mean, I was still probably one of the bigger guys, but a lot more big guys to actually train with, and it can be extremely frustrating if you don't have a big guy to train with, especially if you know that probably getting away with a lot just because of your size. Of course, I have my notes as always. One of the big things I'll say is you almost can't know if your technique worked exactly well or that your technique would work exactly well against a bigger person or someone your same size when you hit it on someone small. It's just the reality of it. No matter like what you do, I'm going to give you some tips, but there's only one way to tell that your stuff's going to work on people your size, and that's to work it on people your size. No matter how perfect you do the technique in practice, because it's even little simple things like I can hit X leg lock entry and hit it textbook perfect technique. If I do it on someone 170 pounds, I don't actually know if I'm doing it well enough, because if a big guy was sprawling or clearing the feet to sprawl, I wouldn't even have the ability to recover quite as well. So even if I do everything perfect, if I do a double leg perfect, I'm not getting the same resistance that I would get from a 200-pound person that I would get from a 250-pound person. So I'm gonna preface it with that. It's for sure, it makes a huge difference, and it's very unfortunate because there's not quite as many big people in Jiu-Jitsu in general. Like look at ADCC trials. When I placed the ADCC trials, there were 72 people in my bracket. Now that's a big bracket, but if you go down to 77 kilograms, average man's weight, there were 253 people in the bracket. That's just the reality that there's just less big people in Jiu-Jitsu. It really sucks. It's really unfortunate, but I'm gonna give you a couple pieces of advice that I think have helped me in this really crappy situation that may or may not help you. So number one is, how are you rolling as a big guy? A lot of times one of the issues is, let's say there's no big people in your practice room. You gotta practice anyways, so you still need to get the maximum rounds that you can get. How are you rolling? Like if you go into the room, I'm gonna assume that you're pretty experienced, let's say blue, purple belt, people are gonna watch you roll, right? For me, even before I was quote unquote experienced in jiu-jitsu, people are they'll watch you roll. They're like, okay, is this guy a safe training partner? Is he a spaz? Is he just going to be a bunch of falling weight? So I guess you got to kind of monitor how you roll. Is your heart rate high? Are you moving too much? I mean, I think that's the best thing, because spazzy is kind of subjective, right? But think about your heart rate. Am I rolling at a low heart rate more consistently than I'm rolling at a high heart rate? I think you got to roll at a low heart rate a lot more as a big guy than you do as a smaller person, because people are watching you, and it's almost like a privilege to be a smaller person, because pretty much, unless you're just a complete spaz, people are gonna roll with you. Whereas if you're a big guy and they see you move left a little too fast, they're gonna be like, nah, I could hurt something, you could hurt me. And they're right, but it sucks, they're not mutually exclusive, right? The people viewing could be right, and it could also just suck for you. So make sure you're monitoring the way you're rolling, because even if you don't think it's happening, you're being watched, because people are always analyzing. They're like, okay, is this guy safe? He's a nice guy. This guy's my friend. Brandon's my friend. I'm just using me as an example. Brandon's my friend, but he's a really cool guy, but he's a little bit big. He's almost like 75 to 100 pounds bigger than me. I'm not sure I'm gonna roll with him. I've had people here that I've been training with for like a year, or training in the same room with for a year, that I just now started rolling with here in Canada, because it's even being well known. When you're big, you're inevitably an injury risk to someone who's smaller, and that's just the harsh reality of things. So monitor the way you're rolling. A great way to do that is just feel your heart rate. Am I going too high? Am I going too hard? You'll feel it, right? I don't know the number, right? I'm sure you can get a heart rate monitor, or you can just hear your beats, right? Roll low heart rate, people are gonna be watching you, and I think that's one of the steps to building a good relationship with people, which means in the future, more people are gonna roll with you. Again, this is assuming there's no big people in your room. The second step is to ask to do situational rounds. Now, the two situations that I suggest for you, being a big person, are guard retention and 50-50. Guard retention is a really, really good one, because now you don't have to put weight on your partner. You can be like, all right, partner, you're gonna pass my guard. If you pass my guard, you get chest to chest, or you force me to turtle, we reset. Now they're not really at much risk of the weight being put on you, and you get to work on a skill which we bigger guys often tend to be much worse at than the lighter guys. Now, of course, there's exceptions like Gordon, Giancarlo Bodoni, Hugo, Fowler, etc. But in general, this helps out both people. Small guy, when you're doing these guard retention rounds, small guy doesn't have to worry about being absolutely smashed, and you get to work on a weakness. So if you only have smaller people in your gym, be like, hey, can I do guard retention? I promise I'm not going to kill you. You're not allowed to wrestle up or do anything. All you can do is retain guard. Next is a 50-50 round. This is a leg lock round. This is the one I do the most with people because at least like if they're about 170, 180 is pretty much the cutoff for me. But when you do these rounds, your size really does not matter very much, right? It's if they grab your heel, they're going to break it, and they don't have to worry about you smashing them, of course, you know. So you could just do 50-50 rounds with very specific constraints, i.e. I'm not allowed to stand up and I'm not allowed to run away. So instead you have to actually engage in 50-50. This is really useful because for one, you're gonna build skills in 50-50 naturally just by doing these rounds. For two, it's gonna give you a chance to evaluate your technique in 50-50 and with leg locks in general. And for three, you're not smashing your partner and you're getting a very specific and very helpful round. So guard retention in 50-50 rounds. Before I continue, I just want to let you guys know that I have a ton of wrestling for jiu-jitsu instructionals. My best-selling one is Dominate the Hand Fight. In this instructional, I introduce kind of the basic principles and concepts about hand fighting, including making connections, moving your partner, finding angles, learning how to use snaps, fakes, pushes, pulls, etc., all in order to set up takedowns. And I introduce you guys into pretty much most of the basic grips like the Russian tie, the underhook, the front headlock, etc., and show you guys how you can use these to create takedown opportunities. You can find this instructional at brandonreed3x.com/dominate. Now, to continue, number 3, if no one will roll with you, try to find an open mat with big guys. Here in Montreal, my favorite training session every week is, well, while I'm here because I'm always traveling, right, is Saturday open mats at 450 Jiu-Jitsu because there's lots of big guys, meaning guys that are over 200 pounds, which is extremely nice because I mostly train at TriStar, which means that lots of the guys are smaller, so maybe I'm not getting quite as many rounds, or all my rounds are basically situational rounds, which is not a bad thing. It's very good. Like I said before, doing situational rounds really helps, but when it's time to prep for competition, it's really nice to have those really, really big guys. Like I have a partner who's 280 to 300 pounds, I believe, and I have other partners that are like 250, 260 who are all pretty tough blue belts, purple belts, and up. And it's really nice because like I'm not getting my body destroyed rolling with guys that are a lot heavier than me every single day, but I get that once a week where I kind of go out of my way. It's a pretty decent drive, and I force myself to roll with bigger guys, which then helps me get a realistic feel of my technique. Is the stuff that I'm learning over the week actually working well for me in the room? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, and then it's a good way to kind of evaluate if you can't have those big guys in your room every single day. Now, last one, which I don't always suggest, but I don't know how big you are. You can also always think about losing weight if possible. Obviously you have to be patient. I don't know how, like if you're medically or obese, you know, or I guess not medically because I'm technically medically obese, but if you find yourself a little bit heavy set, a little fluffy, you could try cutting weight, seeing if that helps, getting a nutrition coach, whatever. Like this, it's not gonna hurt to get smaller, but if you personally just don't want to get smaller, then just ignore that step. Last thing is, like I said, kind of hitting the nail on the head again, is like be patient and be willing to build relationships over time. Just like I said, it's been a year and eventually I started rolling with X people because it is scary, it's intimidating, and you are a danger risk no matter how nice you are in training up until like a certain point. I mean, there's always a risk, right? But up until like a certain level, you're always going to be like a danger risk without even meaning to be. With that being said, the 4 points would be like, how are you rolling with big guys? Are you doing specific situationals? If no one rolls with you, go to open mats and, you know, maybe lose some weight. If not, don't worry about it. Just think about being patient. In a couple weeks, guys, I actually have a new instructional coming out called Hips Don't Lie. It's right here. I'm not sure when, maybe 3-4 weeks, but a lot of you guys have been asking for a takedown defense instructional because I have 9 takedown offensive instructionals out, which you can find at brandonreed3x.com/store. But I'm really taking my time with this one. I want to make sure that the product is really, really good and not just sloppy. I felt like my last instructional was really good, ankle picks, but I rushed it a little bit, and I think I want to make sure that you guys get the highest quality of instructional, and so I'm working on that right now. I'll keep you guys updated through these videos as to when that's going to come out. I also have a Patreon where I post my weekly classes. I talk about 450, right? I will teach there weekly, and I'll post the classes on Patreon, and then also I'm about to go do another seminar tour in Canada. I'll post all of those seminars on Patreon, including all the Q&As on Patreon. I also have started doing match breakdowns. I just posted one, my semifinal match from the ADCC Open. I won't always do like current matches. I'm not always going to be competing, but I'll go review some of my old wrestling matches too, some of my old jiu-jitsu matches, and more. You guys can find all the links to the Patrons and stuff, I think it'll be up here, or you guys can check out the links below, or just look up Wrestling for Dummies on Patreon. Last thing, guys, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. It doesn't have to be related to the video. Tell me your story, be specific. What's your age? When did you start? What's your problem? Etc., etc. And if it's a good question, if it's specific enough and it intrigues me and I think, okay, maybe it's a good question to answer, I'll make a video talking about it and try to answer your question. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Talk to you next time.